The morning rain trickled softly against the high-arched windows of the Lancaster estate, a slow and sorrowful rhythm that matched the heaviness in Clara Morales's chest. She folded a sweater and placed it carefully into a worn canvas bag, lugging her fingers trembling not from the early October chill, but from the message delivered just an hour ago. "Clara, sweetheart, I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Lancaster had said with genuine regret as she sat beside her in the parlor, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Hellman says my heart has strengthened remarkably. My children think it's time I move into assisted living. They believe I'll be safer there. We won't be needing your help anymore." Clara had nodded, suppressing the knot tightening in her throat. For nearly 18 months, she had been the steadfast presence in the widow's life, administering medications, preparing meals, offering quiet companionship, and receiving just enough pay to cover her tiny, fourth-floor apartment in the heart of Queens. Now, at 24 years old, she found herself unemployed, with $200 to her name and rent looming in just 5 days. She descended the marble staircase one final time, her footsteps echoing across the vast foyer of the mansion. The Lancasters had treated her with kindness and respect, her traits and those born into wealth, but kindness alone couldn't cover bills or buy groceries. Clara pushed open the grand oak doors and stepped out into the crisp air. The moment they closed behind her with a soft thud, it felt like another chapter of her life had ended, and this one had left her back where she started with nothing. She had no family to fall back on. Raised in foster care from the age of 5, Clara had grown used to transience houses, names, and promises that never lasted. When she aged out of the system at 18, she learned quickly that the world offered no safety nets for the forgotten. It was that very upbringing that had drawn her into caregiving. She knew, better than most, what it meant to be Alanetto craves someone's presence, even if just in silence. The subway ride back to Queens felt longer than usual. She sat wedged between 2 passengers on the Uptown E train, her reflection flickering in the tunnel-darkened window. A young woman stared back, tired brown eyes, auburn hair pulled into a tidy ponytail, lips pressed together in quiet determination. She wore her best thrifted navy dress, the one she saved for job interviews. When she reached her apartment or cramped studio in a building that groaned under years of neglect, she dropped her bag and slumped onto the sagging mattress. The room was small, barely enough for a table and bed, but it was hers. She spread a stack of newspaper classifieds across the kitchen counter, hopeful despite the odds. Her eyes scanned each listing with a mixture of dread and urgency. Experienced caregiver wanted. Must have certified nursing credentials. Nope. Live-in companion needed. RN license required. Not her. Private nurse with references from luxury homes preferred. That one stung. Clara had the luxury home experience, but only 18 months of it, and no wealthy family was likely to vouch for a girl with no pedigree. The longer she looked, the more hopeless it felt. The clock ticked on. Her stomach growled. She pushed the newspapers aside and pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to fight off the tears. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, she ignored it, but desperation has a way of rewiring instincts. She answered. "Hello, is this Clara Morales?" The voice was crisp, female, professional, limpant, even. "Yes, this is Clara. My name is Celeste Harrington. I understand you're looking for work as a caregiver. I have a position that may interest you, though it's rather unorthodox. Are you available to meet this evening?" Clara sat up straight. "Yes, absolutely. Where? There's a cafe on 72nd and Lexington. Maison du Café. Be there in 1 hour." The line clicked dead before Clara could ask any questions. Maison du Café was the kind of place Clara had only seen in movies: gold-plated signage, plush velvet seats, waiters in pressed white shirts. She stepped inside, feeling instantly out of place in her second-best outfit, a gray blouse and hand-me-down skirt. She spotted Celeste immediately. The woman looked like she belonged on a Vogue coverly 30s, platinum blonde, effortlessly elegant in a tailored camel coat and stilettos. She sat at a window booth, sipping from a porcelain cup like she owned the world. "Miss Morales." Celeste stood, extending a manicured hand. "Thank you for meeting me," Clara said, trying to mask her nerves. Celeste motioned for her to sit, then leaned forward. "My brother Nathaniel Harrington's 29 years old. You may have heard of him, founder of Pinnaclank, worth over $4 billion. Clara's mouth went dry. Of course she'd heard of him. The tech mogul had graced the covers of Forbes and Tech Today, hailed as a prodigy who'd revolutionized social media by age 25. 2 months ago, his helicopter went down during a business trip to Tahoe. Celeste continued. "He survived the crash, but he's been in a coma ever since." I'm so sorry," Clara said quietly. "He's being cared for in a private medical suite at Belmont Hospital. The doctors say his condition is stable but unchanged. We need someone to sit with him from 7 o'clock a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Saturday." Clara nodded, unsure where this was going. "The salary is $4,000 per week." Clara blinked. $4,000 per week? Celeste repeated calmly. "Your job would be to monitor his care, speak with the medical staff, and keep him company. Some believe coma patients respond to voices. My brother was a solitary man, but he deserves the presence of someone kind." Clara's hands shook under the table. That amount of money could change everything. It was more than she'd made in the last 3 months. "But why me?" she asked cautiously. "Surely your family. My husband and I travel extensively, and frankly, watching Nathaniel like that is difficult," Celeste said, her polished facade cracking just slightly. "We need someone who won't get emotionally overwhelmed." Clara hesitated. "I can be professional, but I care deeply. I don't know if I can be detached." "That's exactly why I selected you," Celeste said, her voice lowering. "I need someone who's warm, but also someone who understands discretion. My brother is a very wealthy man. Not everyone in his life can be trusted." Clara stared at her, uncertain. "Discretion? Is there something I should know?" "Only that you should call me immediately if anything unusual occurs." It was a strange instruction, but Clara nodded. She couldn't afford to turn this down. "I can start tomorrow." Celeste's smile was thin and practiced. "Excellent. I'll meet you at the hospital entrance at 7 o'clock sharp." The next morning, Claire arrived at Belmont Private Hospital, nervous and 15 minutes early. The place looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. Lined hallways, soft lighting, polished wood floors. Celeste greeted her in the lobby and led her to a secluded corridor. "This way. He's in room 3112. Inside, the suite was serene, spacious. Monitors beeped softly beside a large bed, where Nathaniel Harrington lay motionless. Dark hair brushed his forehead, and his strong jaw and handsome features seemed incongruous with the lifeless stillness. "Dr. Lynn," Celeste said, introducing a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor. "This is Clara Rouse, Nathaniel's new companion." Dr. Lynn extended a hand. "It's good to have you here, Clara. We don't fully understand what coma patients perceive, but I believe your presence can make a difference. Talk to him, read to him, play music if you'd like. Human connection matters." After the introductions and brief instructions, Celeste left, her heels clicking down the hall. Clara sat in the plush chair beside Nathaniel and studied him. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm Clara. I guess it's just you and me now." She opened her bag and pulled out a book she'd borrowed from the library, a collection of stories by Ray Bradbury. As she read aloud, her voice shaky at first, she felt a strange peace settle over her. She began telling Nathaniel about her life, her childhood, the foster homes, her dream of one day opening a care center for kids who aged out of the system. She laughed, to herself, at the absurdity of talking to a man who couldn't respond, but something told her he was listening. She placed her hand gently over his. "You're not alone," she whispered. "Not anymore." 3 weeks had passed since Clara Emrels began her daily visits to Nathaniel Harrington's bedside, and each morning unfolded with quiet ritual and an ever-deepening sense of purpose. She arrived promptly at 7 o'clock a.m., carrying fresh flowers she purchased from a vendor near Belmont Hospital. Daisies, tulips, lilies would have caught her eye that day. She carefully arranged them in the glass vase near his window, the one place in the room where the light hit just right when the sun rose. Then she'd sit in the same chair, pull it close to Nathaniel's bedside, and say cheerfully, "Good morning, Nathaniel. It's Monday. The city's already humming outside, and I saw a little boy feeding pigeons on my way here. It reminded me of when I used to sneak scraps to the birds behind the group home. Got caught once, had to clean the whole courtyard." The words always began like that, simple observations, small stories. But gradually, they shifted into something deeper. She didn't expect answers, but she paid attention, and that's when Clara began to notice the subtle signs. There were moments when Nathaniel's breathing, assisted by a ventilator, would become smoother, almost synchronized with her voice. Sometimes, when she read a particularly emotional story from her book or recalled painful moments from her childhood, she swore she saw a glint of moisture at the corner of his eyes. At first, she chalked it up to her imagination, but the feelings refused to fade. He was hearing her. He was in there. Dr. Lynn had taken note of Clara's observations with quiet interest. One afternoon, after completing a routine check on Nathaniel's vitals, she turned to Clara with an idea. "Clara, I'd like to try something today," she said gently. "I'm going to attach an EEG monitor while you speak to him. We can observe whether there's increased brain activity when you interact with him." Clara nodded. Her heart pounded as the equipment was set up. Wires were gently placed on Nathaniel's scalp, the screen blinking with soft pulses. She sat beside him, took a deep breath, and began talking. "Do you remember music, Nathaniel? I used to hum lullabies when I couldn't sleep. Not sure if I remember the lyrics anymore, but the melodies stayed with me." She told him about her first heartbreak, about the little girl at her old group home who used to steal extra snacks and secretly give them to others. She shared dreams she'd never dared to speak aloud, owning a small cottage by the ocean, learning to dance, one day adopting a child like her. After 20 minutes, Dr. Lynn returned, holding printouts from the machine. "These readings," she said, all coloring her usually composed voice. "Nathaniel's brain is responding, especially when you talk about your emotions. He's not just listening, processing, engaging." Clara's breath caught. "You mean he's aware? He might be far more conscious than any of us realized." From that moment forward, Clara no longer felt like she was speaking into a void. Her words mattered. Every story, every touch, every breath between them was a bridge, a fragile but growing connection between two worlds. One day, sitting at his side as sunlight streamed in, Clara decided to speak her truth aloud. "Nathaniel," she said softly, smoothing the sheets beside his arm, "I need to say something. I know it sounds impossible, but I think I'm falling for you." Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. "Not the tech genius in the magazines, not the billionaire with the jet-set life. I'm falling for the man who listens to my stories, who calms when I hold his hand, for the quiet strength I feel in your presence. It's silly, isn't it? Loving someone who's never spoken a word back." She reached out and gently held his hand between both of hers. "But this feels real." The heart monitor beeped, slightly faster. She froze. Then she leaned closer, whispering, "If you can hear me, if what I'm saying means anything to you, squeeze my hand." The room held its breath. Nothing, and then so slight, she almost missed it. There was pressure against her palm. Her eyes widened. "Nathaniel, did you just?" The squeeze came again, gentler, but undeniably deliberate. Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she clutched his hand to her chest. "You're in there. I knew it. I knew it." But her hope was soon tested. The next morning, Clara arrived to find Celeste and her husband, Julian, already in the room, deep in conversation with Dr. Lynn. Their voices were hushed but intense, and the moment Clara entered, they fell silent. "Clara," Celeste said, offering a faint smile, "we were just discussing Nathaniel's case, and fortunately, there's been no meaningful change." Clara glanced at Dr. Lynn, who avoided her eyes. Confusion flickered in Clara's chest. Hadn't they just seen proof? "Actually," she began, Nathaniel responded to me yesterday. He squeezed my hand, and the EG. Julian cut her off with a raised hand. We're grateful for your compassion, Clara. But it's not uncommon for caregivers to project emotional investment into imagined responses. It happens all the time. Clara's chest burned. It wasn't imagined. Celeste folded her arms, clearly annoyed. We've consulted additional specialists. They believe Nathaniel's condition may never significantly improve. We're considering alternate care options. The implication hung in the air like a guillotine. What kind of options? Clara asked, her voice low. Julian answered calmly. End of life care, palliative transition. We want what's best for him. Clara couldn't believe what she was hearing. After they left, Dr. Lynn returned and pulled Clara aside. I couldn't say anything earlier, she whispered. But the EEG results yesterday were extraordinary. Nathaniel's brain activity is beyond what's typical for coma patients. But his family, they're pushing for hospice care. And legally, they have the authority. Clara's world spun. They want to disconnect him. I believe he's fighting, Dr. Lynn said softly. But I'm only the physician. You're the one who sees him, who knows him. That night, Clara made a choice. She wouldn't let them end Nathaniel's life. Not when she knew Noel was still in there, still trying. She began staying later each night. Sometimes until midnight, talking, reading, singing quietly, always touching his hand. We need a better way to talk, she told him one evening. Let's make a system. 1 squeeze for yes, 2 for no. Can you do that? 1 squeeze. Her heart soared. She wrote everything down in a journal. Every squeeze, every pattern, every emotional response. Clara began to ask more. Do you want to wake up? 1 squeeze. Are you scared? 2 squeezes. Are you aware your family wants to move you? 1 squeeze, followed by a sharp spike in heart rate. You're not alone, Nathaniel. I'm here. I'll fight for you. The next week brought more urgency. Claire overheard Dr. Lynn arguing with Celeste and Julian in the hall. They wanted to bring in a hospice consultant to evaluate Nathaniel. The transfer paperwork was being prepared. Claire rushed to Nathaniel's side, panic rising. They're coming tomorrow with legal documents. You have to show them. You have to fight. That night, she held his hand for hours, whispering, pleading, please, if there's any part of you that can push, now's the time. She didn't sleep. She just waited. The morning of the meeting arrived cold and gray. Claire was already there, clutching Nathaniel's hand, willing him to respond. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., Celeste, Julian, and a man in a gray suit entered with Dr. Lynn trailing behind. The air was thick with tension. Claire, Celeste said tightly, please step outside while we conduct this review. No, Clara said, standing. I'm his caregiver. I'm staying. You're an employee, Julian snapped. This is a family decision, and you're about to end the life of a man who's still fighting to come back. She shot back, her voice firm. The consultant opened a leather folder. Based on medical documentation, there's been no voluntary movement. Clara turned to Dr. Lynn. Tell them about the EG. Tell them about the responses. Dr. Lynn hesitated. There have been irregularities in data now to suggest higher awareness. Julian scoffed. Coincidence. Reflexes. Clara dropped to her knees beside Nathaniel and whispered, please, Nathaniel. Now, if you've ever heard me show them. Suddenly, his eyelids twitched. Then again more noticeably. Did you see that? Clara cried. He blinked once, twice, slowly, deliberately. Dr. Lynn rushed forward with a flashlight. Nathaniel followed the light. His eyes moved, left, then right. Unbelievable, the consultant murmured. He's waking up, Clara whispered, tears falling freely. He's really waking up. The morning of November 15th arrived under a blanket of gray clouds. The sky mirroring the heavy weight pressing against Clara Morell's chest. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. For the entire night, she remained at Nathaniel's bedside, whispering softly, stroking his hand, her voice steady with love and desperation. Today's the day, Nathaniel, she murmured. They're coming, with papers, with plans to take you away, to give up but I know you're still here. I believe in you. Round 6 o'clock a.m., she finally dozed off in the chair, her head resting on the mattress beside his hand, her fingers still laced through his. It was the sound of voices in the hallway that roused her sharp, commanding tone. Celeste, the documents are finalized. Dr. Reeves from St. Leora Hospice will arrive at 10. Celeste said calmly. We just need Dr. Lynn's signature on the assessment. Clara's heart thundered. She sat upright, gripping Nathaniel's hand. Nathaniel, they're here. If you've been fighting to come back, if you can hear Menno, is the time. Now, there was the faintest squeeze. She held her breath, but it wouldn't be enough. At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., the room filled. Celeste Harrington entered with her husband, Julian, close behind. Dr. Reeves, tall and somber in a charcoal suit, held a slim leather briefcase under one arm. Dr. Lynn followed, her face unreadable. Clara, Celeste began, her tone tight. We need the room for a few moments. Clara stood. I'm not leaving. I'm the one person Nathaniel responds to. If you're making decisions about his future, I'll be here. Julian's face flushed. You're overstepping. This is family business. It's life and death business. Clara shot back. And I won't stand by while you pretend he's already gone. Dr. Reeves cleared his throat. Perhaps we should start with the medical evaluation. Dr. Lynn stepped forward. Nathaniel's vitals remain stable. However, we've observed signs of increased responsiveness in recent days. Eye movement, tracking light, and measured EEG changes that suggest partial consciousness. Julian rolled his eyes. Involuntary spasms. Not entirely, Dr. Lynn said calmly. The movements correspond with verbal prompts. Clara stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Nathaniel has squeezed my hand in response to questions. He followed a light yesterday. He blinked on command. Don't dismiss this because it's inconvenient for your narrative. Dr. Reeves adjusted his glasses. I'll need to see these responses firsthand. Clara turned back to Nathaniel. Her voice softened. Nathaniel, please show them. Everyone held still. And then, slowly, Nathaniel's eyelids fluttered open slightly at first, then more. Clara gasped. He's doing it. Look. Celeste stepped closer, her mask of control slipping. Nathaniel, Dr. Lynn rushed forward with her light. Nathaniel, follow my finger. He did lift, right? Slowly but purposefully. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but words failed. Clara dropped to her knees beside the bed. Nathaniel, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand again. This time, it was strong, certain, and then something no one expected. Nathaniel tried to speak. His lips moved. A rasp escaped. Dr. Lynn quickly adjusted the equipment and leaned in. Say that again, she urged. With visible effort, he croaked, Clara. Clara's hands flew to her mouth. I'm here. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. Heard everything. Celeste staggered back, color draining from her face. The room spun into chaos after that. Doctors were called. Monitors were adjusted. New scans were ordered. But Clara only focused on him. Nathaniel looked at her with confusion, but with recognition. His eyes, glassy and tired, held the same quiet strength she'd always felt beneath the surface. You came back, she whispered. For you, he whispered back. As the day unfolded, Nathaniel's recovery became the talk of the hospital. Dr. Lynn confirmed that his EEG activity had increased dramatically. Respiratory assistance was reduced. By evening, he was breathing on his own. His voice was raw, but gaining strength. That night, when they were finally alone, Clara sat beside him, eyes filled with tears of relief and disbelief. I kept telling you everything, she said with a soft laugh. And you really heard it all? Nathaniel nodded, wincing slightly. Every word. Clara looked down, suddenly nervous. Even the embarrassing parts. The time I cried about losing my bus pass, he literally smiled for the first time. Especially that. Then his expression turned serious. When you told me you loved me, he said, his voice catching. That gave me the will to fight, to come back. I didn't want to wake up to money or fame. I wanted to wake up to you. Clara couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face. But now that you're awake, she said, you're Nathaniel Harrington again, a man everyone wants something from. I'm just. He reached up, trembling but firm, and touched her cheek. You're not just anything. You're the reason I'm here. 3 days later, Nathaniel was sitting upright, voice much stronger. He asked for a phone. His first call was to his legal team. I want my will amended immediately, he said. Remove Celeste and Julian from all inheritance claims. If anything happens to me, everything goes to the Clara Mrales Foundation for Displaced Youth. Clara will manage it. His second call was to Belmont Hospital's board of directors. He made a generous endowment in honor of Dr. Lynn, and Nurse Harold Woe had quietly documented his recovery and believed in Clara's reports even when others didn't. When he hung up, Clara was arranging fresh sunflowers at the window. You did all that? She asked, stunned. Nathaniel nodded. And there's one more thing. He reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out a velvet box. Clara froze. He opened it. Clara Mrales, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Will you marry me? Will you let me love you the way you loved me when I couldn't even speak? Will you build a life with me not because of what I have, but because of who we are together? Clara couldn't stop crying. She covered her mouth with her hand, speechless. Then she nodded through her tears. Yes, yes, Nathaniel, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around him, careful not to jostle the ivy line. 6 months later, Clara Mrales became Clara Harrington in a small garden ceremony on the Harrington estate. The guest list was simpler: Lynn, Nurse Harold, and a handful of children from Clara's old group home, whom Nathaniel had personally pledged to support through college. Celeste and Julian weren't invited. Their legal challenge to the will had been dismissed in court, thanks to extensive documentation, including recordings, EEG results, and nurse reports that proved Nathaniel's conscious awareness far earlier than they had acknowledged. As Clara and Nathaniel exchanged vows, promising to love each other in sickness and in health, in silence and in song, Clara looked into his eyes and saw not the billionaire the world knew, but the soul she'd spoken to in the quiet, when no one else believed he could hear. Nathaniel's recovery was labeled a medical miracle, studied by researchers for years. But Clara knew the truth. The real miracle wasn't scientific. It was love. Love that refused to be silenced. Love that reached into the darkness, took hold of a soul, and brought it home. Love that didn't ask for anything in return, except a chanchado be heard, to be felt, to be believed in. And in the end, it was that love, fierce, loyal, and patient, that rewrote both their stories forever. It had been 3 weeks since Nathaniel Harrington opened his eyes, and still, every morning, when Clara Mrales walked into his sunlit recovery suite with a bouquet of fresh flowers, his heart beat faster than any monitor could measure, not because he was recovering, though he was, rapidly, but because she was there. She had always been there. In his coma, her voice had been the only tether to a world he couldn't reach. In waking life, she was the light he'd long forgotten he needed. Now that he was home, now that he was truly awake, he didn't want to waste a single second. Nathaniel had insisted on staying in a private wing of Belmont Hospital until he could stand and walk without support. Though he could afford the best rehab clinic in the world, he chose to remain close to the people who had helped him return to consciousness: Lynn, Nurse Harold, and most importantly, Clara. Together, Clara and Nathaniel followed a quiet but purposeful routine. Each morning, Clara arrived with breakfast from his favorite cafe, one she'd discovered on her way to work during those first difficult weeks. Then they'd sit by the wide hospital window and watch the sun move slowly across the Manhattan skyline. He would practice speaking, still raspy, but growing strong, reading aloud passages from Clara's favorite books. She would help him stretch, guide him through gentle physical therapy, and sometimes, when no one was watching, sing to him softly. One afternoon, as she hummed an old Spanish lullaby, Nathaniel tilted his head toward her and whispered, That song you sang it before." She paused. "You remember?" "I remember everything." Clara's throat tightened. She reached out and took his hand. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. "You found me," he said, over and over again. Despite the quiet joy between them, outside the hospital walls, complications brewed. Celeste and Julian had vanished from public life since their failed attempt to end Nathaniel's care, but their betrayal left a scar deeper than any crash or coma. "I don't understand how they could write me off," Nathaniel said one night as he and Clara sat in his recovery suite, their fingers interlocked on his blanket-covered lap. "They didn't see what I saw," Clara replied. "They saw a man in a coma. I saw a man trying to return." Nathaniel shook his head. "My own sister, my own blood. You don't owe them forgiveness," Clara said gently. "You owe yourself peace." He turned to her then. "And yeah, what do I owe you?" Clara's eyes softened. "Nothing, but you gave me everything." She leaned in, brushing her forehead to his. "You gave me something too," she whispered. "You gave me someone to believe in. Someone who listened when I thought no one ever would." It was late November when Nathaniel took his first full and needed steps. The hallway outside his suite was long, lined with potted plants and paintings donated by recovering patients. Clara walked beside him, barely restraining her instinct to hold his elbow, but he refused. "I want to do this for you," he said, "to show you what your love brought back." He took slow, careful steps, his legs trembling under the weight of his own body. Clara held her breath, hands clasped, watching every movement like a prayer. By the time they reached the end of the hallway, she was crying. "Don't cry," Nathaniel said with a weak smile. "I can't help it." She laughed through her tears. "You're walking. I'm walking toward you." They stood facing each other in the corridor. No nurses, no doctors, just the two of them, just as it had always been. And for the first time since he woke up, Nathaniel leaned forward and kissed her. Soft, honest, trembling with gratitude. Though Nathaniel had already proposed in the hospital, he insisted on doing it again, this time the way he'd always imagined it. "I want to stand," he told Clara. "I want to look you in the eyes without machines or monitors. I want to ask you to marry me when I'm myself again." Clara teased him gently. "I already said yes. You're not getting out of it." But she agreed. And so, one snowy evening in December, Nathaniel invited Clara to the rooftop terrace of the Harrington family's penthousia place that had once felt cold and hollow, now bathed in golden lights and warmth. She wore a second-hand winter coat. He wore a tailored black jacket, slightly loose on his still-healing frame. There was a small string quartet playing softly near the rail. In the middle of the terrace, a single velvet box sat on a table, surrounded by Clara's favorite flower, sunflowers and white roses. When she reached him, Nathaniel got down slowly on one knee. "Clara Morales," he said, his voice rich with emotion. "Will you still marry me even now that I can stand and walk and speak? Even now that I'm the man the world sees, not just the one you knew when no one else could hear?" Clara knelt with him, tears frozen on her cheeks. "Nathaniel Harrington, I would marry you 1,000 times. In silence, in song, in every possible way." He slipped the ring on again, this time without wires, without monitors, without fear, only love. The weeks that followed were filled with transformation. Clara moved into Nathaniel's newly renovated townhouse, a warm, art-filled space in Brooklyn where she could still visit her old neighborhood. She continued to work with foster care charities while Nathaniel returned gradually to his business, stepping down as CEO to serve as board advisor instead. "Money doesn't drive me anymore," he told her one morning over breakfast. "Purpose does, and you gave me mine." Together, they launched the Clara Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at supporting young adults aging out of foster care. Scholarships, housing, mentorship, everything Clara once needed, they now gave to others. And every Saturday, without fail, they hosted dinners for a rotating group of foster youth, community organizers, and healthcare workers, always ending the evening with music and stories. just like the ones Clara once read aloud in a quiet hospital room. On their wedding day, exactly 1 year from the morning Clara walked into Nathaniel's hospital room for the first time, sky was clear and blue. The ceremony took place in a small garden behind the Clara Foundation headquarters. Dr. Lynn officiated. Nurse Harold stood proudly beside the groom. Clara walked down the aisle in a simple ivory dress. Nathaniel, now fully recovered, waited under a canopy of white blooms. Their vows were private, spoken in soft whispers only they could hear, but everyone in the garden could feel the weight of their love yearned, tested, and reborn. Years later, when asked by journalists about his miraculous recovery, Nathaniel always gave the same answer. "It wasn't medicine that brought me back," he said. "It was love. It was a woman who refused to give up, who saw me when no one else did, who spoke to me like I mattered, even when I couldn't speak back." And when Clara was asked how she had found the strength to keep going through all the uncertainty and pain, she simply replied, "I just listened to my heart." The first time Clara Morales woke up in Nathaniel Harrington's bed, not as his caregiver, not in a hospital chair, but as his wife, it felt surreal. She lay still for a long moment, her head resting on his bare shoulder, their legs tangled beneath the soft duvet of their Brooklyn townhouse. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, casting a golden glow on the hardwood floor. She could hear the distant hum of the city subway rumble, taxi horns, life. Nathaniel stood beside her and pulled her closer with a sleepy smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington." Clara blinked back happy tears. "Still sounds strange." "It sounds perfect," he whispered. And it was. But perfection didn't mean easy. Marriage, Clara had always imagined, would be simple once the hard part was over. But she hadn't considered what it meant to marry a man who had lived through a coma, who had awakened to find his family had tried to erase him. In the first few weeks of their marriage, Nathaniel struggled with night terrors. He would wake in a cold sweat, breath shallow, eyes darting toward the door like he expected someone to pull the plug again. Clara was always there, her voice gentle, her touch grounding. She'd learned what to say, what to sing, how to calm the storm. But even she couldn't fix everything. "I thought coming back would be the hardest part," Nathaniel admitted one night as they sat on the couch, the TV glowing dimly in front of them. "But it's staying living that's harder than I expected." Clara tucked her feet beneath her and leaned against him. "It's okay to be scared. You're not alone anymore." He looked at her, vulnerability raw in his eyes. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm trapped in that bed, like I haven't really come back yet." She kissed his temple. "Then I'll keep talking to you, just like I did before, until you're fully here." Nathaniel's return to public life wasn't met with universal celebration. Many of his business peers had already begun circling his empire like vultures during his coma, assuming his silence would be permanent. Some had even aligned with Celeste and Julian, trying to secure contracts and assets during his presumed absence. But when Nathaniel stepped back into the boardroom, live, alert, and no longer the man they remembered, everything changed. He wore a suit, but gone was the arrogant tech mogul. In his place stood a calm, measured man who listened more than he spoke. And beside him, always, was Clara, no longer an employee or a stranger, but a partner in every way. At the first major investor meeting since his return, Nathaniel stood at the head of the long oak conference table. "My recovery taught me something," he began. "That time is the only true currency we have, and connection, the real kindness worth more than any empire." He outlined a new direction for the company: ethical data use, youth mentorship in tech, transparency. Many were stunned. A few pushed back. Clara, sitting in the back, caught his eye. He nodded once, as if drawing courage from her, and then he doubled down on everything. By the end of the week, 3 board members resigned. Nathaniel called it spring cleaning. While Nathaniel was reclaiming his life in the public eye, Clara found herself stepping into a role she never imagined as public speaker. After a local journalist wrote an article about her role in Nathaniel's awakening, she received dozens of requests to speak at schools, hospitals, foster centers. "I'm not a hero," she said at first. shy and uncertain. I just talked to someone who needed to be heard. But when she stood before a group of young women aging out of foster care girls who reminded her of herself, Clara felt something shift. Her story wasn't just about Nathaniel's coma. It was about hope. So she told them everything. How she once had no family, no money, no help. How she almost gave up. And how one desperate phone call, one mysterious job offer, had changed everything. You don't need to be rich to make a difference. She told them, you just need to stay when others walk away. The room stood in applause. Nathaniel cried when she told him about it later. They traveled for the first time 6 months after the wedding. Clara had never left the East Coast before. Nathaniel had seen the world, but never with eyes that truly appreciated it. Together, they explored Barcelona, wandered the art-lined streets of Kyoto, and drank espresso in the early morning mist of Florence. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the Amalfi Coast, Clara turned to him. I want to adopt someday, she said softly. Not just one child, maybe 2, maybe 3, kids who don't have anyone, kids like me. Nathaniel wrapped his arms around her. Then we will, and maybe we foster first, just to start. Whatever you want, Clara, I just want to build it with you. They kissed beneath the stars, the sea stretching out behind them like an endless horizon, just like their future. The day a letter from Celeste arrived, Nathaniel was surprised it didn't come through a lawyer. It was handwritten, a single envelope, no return address. He sat on the porch, hands trembling slightly, Clara beside him as he read, Nathaniel, I don't deserve forgiveness, and I don't expect a reply, but I need to say this. I was afraid of losing everything, afraid of facing a world where you weren't coming back. I let fear make me cruel. I let money matter more than it ever should have. Clara saved you, and you saved yourself. I hope you both build something better than the family I gave you. See, Nathaniel said nothing for a long time. Clara touched his hand. What do you feel? Relief, he said, and a little sadness. Are you going to respond? He shook his head. She wrote it for herself, not for me. A year after their wedding, Clara and Nathaniel opened the doors of their newly restored townhouse, this time not as husband and wife, but as foster parents. The first child was a boy named Elijah, 10 years old, quiet, with eyes too old for his age. Then came Meyer, a bubbly 7-year-old who had never had her own bed before. Each child brought new noise, new chaos, and new joy. Clara decorated the walls with their drawings. Nathaniel taught them how to build websites and fix old radios. Together, they made pancakes on Sundays, hosted movie nights on Fridays, and read aloud on rainy afternoons. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. And as Clara tucked Meyer in one night, the little girl looked up at her and asked, Are you going to leave? Clara bent down, brushing hair from her face. Never. And she meant it. Because after everything, after pain, after miracles, after unimaginable love, Clara and Nathaniel had finally found the life they were meant to live. A life made of second chances. A life where healing became home. A life where love had the final word. The Harrington townhouse on Greenstone Avenue had changed in many ways since Nathaniel first brought Clara home. Gone were the sterile white walls and echoing silence. In their place, drawings taped to the fridge, tied dinosaurs hidden beneath couches, the faint scent of pancakes lingering every Sunday morning, and the sound of little feet racing down the stairs at odd hours. It was no longer a house. It was a living, breathing home. 6 months into fostering their third child, a spirited 12-year-old named Jonah, Clara sat on the edge of the bed he refused to call his and listened as he finally opened up. I don't unpack my bag, he said, arms crossed. Never stays long, never lasts. Clara didn't try to convince him. She simply said, That's okay. You don't have to unpack until you're ready. But just so you know, there's a dresser here with your name on it, and no one else is using it. Jonah stared at her, distrust deeply etched in his features. She recognized that look. She had worn it once. You'll get tired of me, he mumbled. No, Clara said, not ever. She didn't say it like a promise. She said it like a fact. And slowly, over the weeks that followed, Jonah began leaving his toothbrush out on the sink, then a sweatshirt on the back of the chair, then one night without a word unpacked his bag. While Clara nurtured the children with a natural instinct born of her own past, Nathaniel found himself navigating unfamiliar waters. He was still the man who had built $1 billion tech company, still the man whose willpower pulled him from a coma, but when it came to kids, he was constantly second-guessing himself. One evening, he sat alone in the backyard, staring up at the stars, elbows on his knees. Clara found him there quiet. "Tough day," she asked gently. "I tried to teach Jonah how to ride a bike," he said. "He gave up after 10 minutes, said he'd never learn." "I didn't know what to say." "You didn't have to say anything," Clara said, sitting beside him. "You stayed. That matters more." Nathaniel looked at her. "I didn't grow up like this. I didn't have loss. I had too much, if anything. And now, I feel like I'm building something I don't always know how to hold." Clara smiled and laced her fingers through his. "You're learning, and that's what being a father looks like." Nathaniel blinked. "Father, you are one, Nathaniel, in every way that counts." His throat tightened. "Even if I mess up, especially if you do." One rainy afternoon, Claire received a phone call that made her world tilt on its axis. "Miss More Less You Mean, Mrs. Harrington, this is Donna Richards. I used to run the Haven Group home in Queens. I don't know if you remember me." Claire's heart jumped. "Of course I remember you. I thought you might want to know someone left a letter for you." "A letter? It's from your birth mother." Clara's breath caught. She had stopped believing long ago that anyone from her past might resurface. That chapter of her life had been closed, sealed with layers of abandonment, survival, and quiet acceptance. "I'll come by tomorrow," she whispered. The next day, Clara visited Haven with her heart in her throat. The walls were smaller than she remembered, the colors more faded, but the same old creaky staircase greeted her like a familiar ghost. Donna handed her a thin envelope, yellowed, sealed, dated nearly a year ago. "It came months after she passed," Donna explained. "She left it in a church, said it was in case her daughter ever came looking." Clara opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. "My dearest Clarita, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I gave you away, and I've never forgiven myself. I was young, lost, running from pain I didn't know how to carry, but I thought of you every day. I followed your name through social services. I watched from a distance when you graduated high school. You were so strong, so brave. I'm sorry for the silence. I'm sorry for the absence, but I want you to know that your life mattered. You mattered. I hope someone sees you the way I should have, loves you the way you deserve. If that ever happens, let yourself receive it. Don't hide. Don't push it away. With love, I never stop carrying. Mama." Clara cried for a long time, not because it changed anything, but because it made her feel seen, be the one person she had always wished had stayed. 2 weeks later, Clara and Nathaniel welcomed a baby girl into their home. Her name was Rosie, 3 months old, born with medical complications. Her birth parents had surrendered custody at the hospital. Rosie had no one, until now. Clara fell in love instantly with her soft brown curls, her tiny fingers that wrapped around Clara's pinky like she'd been waiting for it all along. "I'm afraid I'll break her," he whispered. "You won't," Clara replied. "She's stronger than she looks, like someone else I know." One night, Clara and Nathaniel sat on the roof after the kids were asleep. Jonah was reading chapter books now. Maya had started ballet lessons. Rosie could when Clara sang. "You realize," Clara said, sipping her tea, "we're outnumbered." Nathaniel laughed. "And it's only just beginning, isn't it?" She nodded. "I used to think love was something fragile, something you had to guard. But with you, I feel like it grows the more I give it away." Nathaniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box different from the one he'd proposed with. Inside was a delicate silver charm in the shape of a sunflower. "For the woman who brings light to everything," he said, "and gives it freely." Clara's eyes filled. "You still remember the sunflowers." "I remember everything," he whispered. 2 years later, on the 5th anniversary of Nathaniel's awakening, they held a celebration at the Clara Foundation. There were speakers, music, a slideshow that made everyone cry. But the most powerful moment came when Jonano 16 stepped up to the microphone. "My name is Jonah," he said. "I used to think family was just a word, something other people had. Then Clara and Nathaniel gave me a dresser, then a bike, then trust, then love." He paused, voice cracking. "I don't know where I'd be without them, but I know where I am now, home." The applause echoed like thunder, and Clara, sitting beside Nathaniel, smiled through her tears. One quiet morning, Clara awoke before dawn. She walked into Rosie's room, now painted pale yellow, and picked her up from the crib. Outside, the city was still asleep. She held Rosie to her chest, gently rocking, and began to hum. The same lullaby she'd once sung in a hospital room. The same song that brought a man back to life. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, eyes soft, smile easy. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Clara shook her head, just grateful. They stood there, bathed in the light of a rising sun, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing but trust, stubborn hope, and a love that never gave up. A love that was now a family. A love that had grown beyond them and would keep growing forever. Time did not slow for Clara and Nathaniel Harrington. It moved swiftly and beautifully, not like a whirlwind that leaves destruction in its wake, but like a steady current that carries you home, one memory at a time. Their days were still loud, still filled with toys on the staircase, half-finished cereal bowls, missed school buses, and sticky fingers on glass tabletops. But it was never chaos. It was rhythm. It was life. It was everything Clara once dreamed of when she used to whisper her fears to a man who couldn't respond. And now he responded to everything. Jonah was 20 when he stood at the gates of Harrington University, a duffel bag on one shoulder and an acceptance letter in the other. He hugged Clara first, long and quiet, then Nathaniel, who pulled him into a rare and firm embrace. "Go change the world," Nathaniel whispered. Jonas stepped back, smirking. "I already am. You changed mine first." They watched him disappear through the archway, his shoulders broad with confidence Clara had never seen in the scared, guarded boy who once refused to unpack. That night, Nathaniel held her close in bed. "You gave him everything," he said. "No," Clara replied, resting her head against his chest. "We gave him a place to bloom." Meyer, now 15, had turned their living room into a makeshift dance studio. On most evenings, she twirled between furniture, music pouring from her phone, her eyes closed in pure joy. One night, after a small recital at the community center, Meyer approached Clara with a red envelope. Inside, a letter of acceptance to a prestigious arts academy. "But it's far," Meyer said. 3 hours away. "I can't." Clara cut her off. "You can." "I'm scared." "That means it matters." Nathaniel chimed in gently. "We'll visit every weekend, or every day if you need." Maya blinked, then laughed through her tears. "You guys are ridiculous." "We're yours," Clara whispered. And that was enough. At 5 years old, Rosie was all questions and sparkles and untamable curls. She insisted on making her own toast like a grown-up and told strangers in grocery stores that her mommy rescued her from the clouds. "Is that true?" one old woman asked kindly. Rosie nodded solemnly. "She pulled me right out of the sky and made me hers." Clara never corrected her, because in some ways maybe it was true. Rosie was love incarnate, a little soul that entered their lives quietly, but stayed loud forever. Nathaniel often said Rosie reminded him of Clara soft, but made of steel. She reminded Clara of hope. On Nathaniel's 50th birthday, Clara threw a quiet party in their backyard. Close friends, former foster kids now grown and thriving, Dr. Lynn and Nurse Harold, even Donner from the group home. Clara stood at the edge of it all, watching the lives they'd touched weave through one another like music. Nathaniel came to her side, two glasses of cider in hand. "You've built something rare," he said. "No," she replied, smiling. "We did." Later that night, when everyone had gone, Nathaniel leaned across their bed and whispered, "I want to adopt again." Clara raised a brow. We already have 5. I know. You want 6? He nodded. Why not? She laughed and rolled over to face him. I'd take 100 more. If it meant they got to feel loved. Nathaniel kissed her forehead. Then let's keep going. While reorganizing their old bedroom closet one afternoon, Clara stumbled upon a box labeled Voice in Nathaniel's handwriting. Inside were dozens of cassette tapes, each one dated from the weeks following his coma. On them, his voice, slow, strained, but filled with stories he recounted just in case he ever forgot them again. On one tape, dated 6 months after his recovery, Clara heard, "Sometimes I still dream about the silence, but in the silence, there's always her voice." Clara's voice. It pulled me back, not with shouting, but with presence. That's what she gave me, a place to return to. She sat on the floor and listened to the whole box. It took her all afternoon. By the time Nathaniel found her, her face was wet with tears. You kept them, she asked. I needed to remember. You always will, she whispered. And then she kissed him like she had the first time when he stood up after months in a coma and walked toward her across a hospital floor, as if the world stopped, as if love was the only language that ever mattered. A year later, the Clara Foundation launched its new campus, a sprawling building with dorms, study halls, family rooms, and therapy gardens for aged-out foster youth. The sign outside read, "The Muriel's Harrington Center for Hope, where every story matters." Clara stood at the ribbon with Rosie on one side and Janino interning for the foundation the other. Nathaniel gave the opening speech. He said, "This center isn't made of bricks or funding. It's made of one woman's refusal to let silence be the end of someone's story. It's made of her voice, the one that told me I mattered, and the one I now pass forward to every child who thinks no one is listening. Someone is. We are." When he finished, Clara kissed him on the cheek and whispered, "Still the best words I've ever heard." He turned to her with a smile. "I learned from the best." On their 20th anniversary, Clara and Nathaniel returned to Belmont Hospital. It had been turned into a new medical research center, but room 3112 still existed, preserved as a part of medical history. Clara reached for Nathaniel's hand as they stepped inside. The room was empty now. No machines, no monitors, just light. She walked to the corner where her chair had once been. "I sat right here," she said, her voice catching. "And I told you everything." Nathaniel looked around slowly. "I remember your stories, your voice, the rhythm of your heart." She turned to him, eyes brimming. "You really heard all of it." "I never stopped hearing you," he replied. Then they stood in the center of the room and simply held each other, not to celebrate the past, but to carry it forward into everything they still had yet to build. Years passed. The children grew. Some moved out. Some moved in. The townhouse always had one empty room waiting, because Clara and Nathaniel never closed their doors. Not even once. They aged, slowly and gracefully, their love softening like well-worn pages of a beloved book. One morning, while walking hand in hand through their neighborhood, Rosie 17 asked them what love really was. Clara looked at Nathaniel, and he looked at her. Then, together, they answered, "Love is choosing someone even when they can't answer, even when they can't give back. It's staying when the room is silent, and trusting that someday your voice will bring them home."